Good afternoon, all. We warmly welcome you to Advocata's press briefing on the urgency of state-owned enterprise reforms. The objective of today's discussion is to discuss the strain created by state-owned enterprises on the already fragile economy of Sri Lanka. Today's session will kickstart with a presentation by Advocata's policy analyst KD Vimanga, highlighting the performance of selected state-owned enterprises based on the data gathered by the Advocata research team. This then will be followed by opening remarks on the urgency for state-owned enterprise reforms by the distinguished panelists present here today. Then we will open the floor for questions from the members of the press present here at the venue. Also, please note that this session will be premiered online on Advocata and Advocata Plus Facebook and YouTube channels today at 6 p.m. සුබ සන්ධ්‍යාවක් ඇඩ්වොකාට් ආයතනය විසින් රාජ්‍ය සතු ව්‍යවසායන් ප්‍රතිසංස්කරණය කිරීමේ අත්‍යවශ්‍යතාවය සාකච්ඡා කිරීමට මේ සංවිධානය කරලා තිබෙන සැසියට ඔබ සියලු දෙනාම ඉතාමත්ම සාදරයෙන් පිළිගන්නවා. අද දින මේ සාකච්ඡාවේ පරමාර්ථය වන්නේ රාජ්‍ය ව්‍යවසායන් විසින් ලංකාවේ මේ දැනටමත් දුර්වල ආර්ථිකයට ඇති කරලා තියෙන බලපෑම සාකච්ඡා කිරීමටයි. අද දින සැසිය ආරම්භ වන්නේ තෝරාගත් රාජ්‍ය ව්‍යවසායන් වල ප්‍රගති විශ්ලේෂණයකින්. මේ ප්‍රගති විශ්ලේෂණය ඉදිරිපත් කරන්නේ ඇඩ්වොකාට් ආයතනයේ ප්‍රතිපත්ති විශ්ලේෂක KD විමංග විසින්. ඊට පස්සේ අපේ විද්වත් සාකච්ඡා මණ්ඩලයේ සම්පත්දායකයන් විසින් රාජ්‍ය සතු ව්‍යවසායන් ප්‍රතිසංස්කරණය කිරීමේ අත්‍යවශ්‍යතාවය පිළිබඳව අදහස් කිහිපයක් ඔබට ඉදිරිපත් කරනවා. ඉන් පසු අපිත් එක්ක එකතු වෙලා සිටින මේ මාධ්‍යවේදීන්ට අපි දන්නවා අපිට ගොඩක් ප්‍රශ්න තියෙනවා කියලා. මේ ප්‍රශ්න අපේ විද්වත් සාකච්ඡා මණ්ඩලයට ඉදිරිපත් කිරීමට අපි ඔබට අවස්ථාව ලබා දී තිබෙනවා. ඒ වගේම මම මතක් කර සිටින්න කැමතියි මේ අවස්ථාවේදී ඇඩ්වොකාට් ආයතනයේ සමාජ මාධ්‍ය ජාලය වන Advocata Plus සහ Advocata වල Facebook හා YouTube අද සවස් 6ට නැවතත් මේ සැසිය නැරඹීමට ඔබට අවස්ථාව අපි උදා කර දී තිබෙනවා. ඔබගේ කාලය තවත් යොදා ගන්න නැතුව මම කැමතියි අද අපිත් එක්ක එකතු වෙලා තිබෙන විද්වත් සාකච්ඡා මණ්ඩලය ඔබට හඳුන්වා දෙන්න. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce the distinguished panelists we have here today. We have Professor Rohan Samarajiva. Professor Samarajiva is the founding chair of Learn Asia, an ICT policy and regulation think tank that is active across emerging Asia and the Pacific. He is also a member of the board of advisors of Sarvodaya and the Advocata Institute. Professor Samarajiva was a team leader at the Sri Lanka Ministry for Economic Reform, Science and Technology, as well as the Director General of Telecommunications in Sri Lanka. He was also an honorary professor at the University of Moratuwa. Thank you very much for being here, Professor Samarajiva. Next, we have Dr. Sarath Rajapatirana. Dr. Rajapatirana is the chair of academic program at the Advocata Institute. He has worked across the world with leading international organizations such as the World Bank, World Trade Organization, International Trade Center in Geneva, and the International Cooperative Alliance in Latin America. He is also the vice president of the Sri Lanka Economists Association. Thank you, Dr. Rajapatirana, for being here with us today. Next, we have Ms. Anarkali Munasinghe. Ms. Munasinghe currently serves as on the board of directors of Keels Hotels PLC and the Lankan Angel Network. She is also a member of the advisory board of the Advocata Institute and brings with her demonstrated history of working in financial services industry. Thank you for being here, Ms. Munasinghe. I'd now like to invite Advocata's policy analyst KD Vimanga to begin the session with a presentation on the performance of selected state-owned enterprises. Over to you, Vimanga.
Thank you, Satya. Ladies and gentlemen, let me not take any longer, but let me take you through a brief presentation which sets the precursor to our discussion. The slides will be made available to the media, and the purpose of this presentation is to basically do a simple analysis on the performance of a few selected state-owned enterprises and thereby set the stage for the discussion which will be taken forward by the eminent panel before you today. Ladies and gentlemen, let me start with a basic question. Do you know how much it costs to keep the Ceylon Petroleum Corporation, the Ceylon Electricity Board, Sri Lankan Airlines, the National Water Board, and Satosa afloat? Can you think, we'll give you a few minutes, can you think of the amount that it costs to keep these organizations afloat? Before I proceed any further, let me just simply define what a state-owned enterprise is. Now, a state-owned enterprise is an organization either a statutory body, a regulatory agency, a promotional institution, or an educational corporation, that has been created by an act of parliament, or in recent times, created under the Companies Act. Most of these SOEs either carry commercial activities or non-commercial activities. It can change from one SOE to another. The next and the most important question: how many SOEs are really there, and how many subsidiaries do these SOEs have? And this is a question that no one knows. It's really something that should be found out. But from the research that the Advocat Institute has been carrying out since 2015, we've released 2 SOE reports, and we're releasing our next in 2020. What we figured out is that approximately there's about 527. And out of these 527, 55 have been classified as SOEs of strategic importance. But for some reason, organizations like the Cashew Corporation, the Timber Corporation, that probably does not meet the requirements of what a strategically important organization, have also been classified under these 55. The other important issue that we figured out during the course of our research is that only 10.4% of information on SOEs on the 55 is available for the public. And through the course of my presentation, I'll emphasize why public information is an integral part of the work that we do. As you can see, the cumulative losses of the 55 SOEs is a staggering 1.2 trillion rupees. And of course, some of these SOEs do make profits, which adds on to about 1.27 trillion, but it's a result of subsidies, it's a result of capital injections that have been made by the Treasury. Another key important issue that we figured out with SOEs is the fact that they have subsidiaries. I'll take one example, which is the Sri Lanka Insurance Corporation. Now, the Sri Lanka Insurance Corporation is under the Ministry of Finance. However, it has direct subsidiaries and indirect and sub-subsidiaries. Some of the subsidiaries of the Sri Lanka Insurance Corporation is Lanka Hospitals. The SOE that is commonly discussed these days, which is Litrogas, is also a subsidiary of the Sri Lanka Insurance Corporation. Then you have, as you can see, hotels, management service organizations, sub-subsidiaries such as Lanka Hospitals, Sino-Lanka Hotels and Spas. So you name it, there is a whole list of sub-subsidiaries and subsidiaries. And the issue with that is it creates significant issues in governance, accountability, and it also acts as a risk for performance and the continuation of these SOEs. So that's a significant issue of having subsidiaries. If I was to come back to that question I asked you before, what is the cost of running, of keeping these 5 big SOEs? And it's a staggering 348,479,189 rupees per day. That is the cost of keeping these 5 SOEs running per day that is incurred by the Treasury. So that's a loss to our state coffers. This is simply a breakdown of total SOE debt. Now, the issue here is what we have put out here is SOE debt without without the non-financial public corporations. Still, without that information, it still comes up to about 9% of GDP. Now, most importantly, we've tried to look at it from a more comprehensive approach. And what we can say is that because of SOEs, we've not got our priorities right. If you compare the SOE losses to government welfare expenditure, such as Samurdhi, in 2009, it was about 310%. As a percentage, the health budget, it was about 56%. As a percentage to education, it was about 47%. So what we can say is having SOEs, we've not really got our priorities right, and cutting these losses can be a net and can be a positive externality where we can prioritize welfare further on. For the purposes of this presentation, I'll quickly take you through the financials of the big 4 SOEs, which is Sri Lankan Airlines, SLTB, Petroleum Corporation, and the Electricity Board. I'm not going to dwell on each of these financials because we've made those available to you. But what we can see, especially with Sri Lankan Airlines, is that cumulative losses or annual losses have been, especially in 2020, has been a staggering 47 billion. And we see that transition from 2008 onwards, when the government of Sri Lanka took over, how losses have improved over time. This is just, we've made a breakdown of their assets, liabilities, equity. As you can see, liabilities have increased in contrast to assets and equity. And then, of course, we're discussing the issue of debt nationally at the moment, and we can see that public guaranteed debt for Sri Lankan Airlines has risen over time, and this is of a serious concern to debt sustainability, and our future analysis will really explore this further on. Let me quickly take you through Ceylon Petroleum Corporation. It is the same scenario. We've seen losses. We've seen significant losses over time. One reason why there is a profit in 2019 and 2020 is because the price of global oil internationally came down because of lockdowns, but consistently it has been losses all throughout. Now, I think looking at assets is important, especially from an investor perspective, and also looking at, because these are all public institutions, so we have provided a list of the valuation of their assets for all these SOEs. The outstanding debt to banks of Ceylon Petroleum Corporation, as you can see, reached its highest of 566 billion in 2019, and for 2020, it's about 529 billion. Again, it's a similar trend with the Ceylon Electricity Board. You can see the losses they've incurred over time. And one staggering revelation was that the Ceylon Electricity Board has an asset valuation of about 1 billion Sri Lankan rupees. However, if you this brings up a question as to why you have such an asset base, but you still incur profits of such a large magnitude. So this creates serious questions for us to think and explore further. It is quite similar. We've provided a breakdown of the debt of Sri Lankan Airlines, and you can, of the Ceylon Electricity Board as well. Again, this trend goes on to the Ceylon Transport Board, and they've made a loss of about 2.3 billion. And let me take you to the next slide, where we looked at assets. I mean, in contrast to other SOEs, SLTB doesn't really have an asset valuation of such a magnitude, but it does have a significant proportion of assets. Now, another significant issue surrounding SOEs that we figured out was in terms of labor productivity. The ADB has done an analysis which has found out that, as you can see, out of countries such as Indonesia, Kazakhstan, Vietnam, a lot of and a number of South Asian countries and East Asian countries, Sri Lanka has the lowest labor productivity in relation to state-owned enterprises. So that's a key deficiency of having state-owned enterprises. Now, we've done a basic analysis here as to what is really wrong with state-owned enterprises. And if I was to quickly take you through this, of course, all this leads to structural inefficiencies, and our SOE reports comprehensively analyze these, and they can be accessed on our website. And secondly, and most importantly, what we don't really explore in the public discourse is issues of competitive neutrality and how having SOEs leads to market distortions. There's a whole list of issues under competitive neutrality. For example, a lot of these SOEs don't fall under antitrust laws, or then there's, it doesn't create a level competitive playing field for other organizations. Then, as I said, subsidies, there's concession refinancing. So there's a whole list of issues that leads to market failure and how SOEs are a burden on the state as a result of the continuation of having our SOEs. Now, the Advocate Institute believes that this is probably, we've reached the boiling point with the current economic situation. As you know, there are serious questions on debt sustainability that we should all be concerned about. And therefore, it is high time that we really employ policy solutions. And one of those areas that can easily be reformed is state-owned enterprises. We see three possible solutions which are immediate. Number one is privatization. Of course, then we can look at restructuring and disinvestment, and listings is also an option that could be explored. Of course, there are consistent reforms that need to happen all throughout. And some of these are strengthening governance, improving efficiency, cost-reflective pricing, unbundling key sectors. And a lot of these are applicable to all the sectors of our economy and all those SOEs that function there. Now, with the kind of research that we've been doing, we're facing three significant challenges. Number one is the lack of missing data. A lot of the data is not available publicly, and let me take you to the next slide. Especially annual reports, which are a requirement, which are a regulatory requirement that SOEs need to publish their annual reports. What we can say from the research we've done from 2015 onwards is that out of 52 SOEs for 2015, 12 SOEs have no annual reports. In 2016, it was 18. In 2017, it was 18. In 2018, it was 31. In 2019, it was 21. And by 2020, 46 SOEs out of the strategic SOEs from the 52 have not filed or submitted their annual reports. And it is the same, the Public Enterprises Department, which is part of the Treasury, submits PED reports, which basically analyzes the performance of SOEs. Unfortunately, since 2018, none of these reports have been published. And the Advocate Institute has filed RTIs in order to get this information under the Right to Information Act. We've since for the 52 SOEs that we've filed, we've received replies for 9 SOEs, and so for 43 SOEs, we've not received any form of acknowledgement. 2 of those, there is a mandatory requirement that SOEs need to get back to you within 14 days. And out of the 9, we've only heard from 2 SOEs within that mandatory requirement. 2 RTIs have been rejected on grounds of security and trade secrets. But we believe there is a significant requirement for this information, which is of public interest, to be made available. So, ladies and gentlemen, this is the work that we've been doing, and these are all the challenges that we've been facing. And our analysis really illustrates that there needs to be reform, and this reform has to be immediate, considering the situation in the economy and the trajectory of the country. And we have an esteemed panel of before you to discuss how and why these reforms need to be carried out. Thank you.
Thank you, Bimanga, for setting the foundation for today's discussion. I now invite Professor Rohan Samarajiva to present his introductory remarks on the urgency of state-owned enterprise reforms. Over to you, sir.
විනාඩි 5ක් දීලා තියෙනවා මේ මගේ අරමුණ විනාඩි 5න් ඔයාලට යම්කිසි ඉඟියක් දෙන්න මොන වගේ ප්‍රශ්න වලටද අපිට උත්තර දෙන්න පුළුවන් කියලා. 997ට කලින් ශ්‍රී ලංකා ටෙලිකෝම් ආයතනයත් මේ ගණයේ තිබුණේ. නමුත් මංගල සමරවීර ඇමතුමාගේ නායකත්වයේ යටතේ ඒක පුද්ගලීකරණය කෙරුණා. ඒකම නියාමන ආයතනයක් පිහිටවුවා විදුලි සංදේශ නියාමන කොමිෂන් සභාව. ඒකේ පළවෙනි බලන් ගණන් හදන හැටියට ඒකේ ප්‍රධාන විධායක නිලධාරියා හැටියට මම 998 ඉඳන් කටයුතු කරා. දැන් ඔය ලයිස්තු වැළුවොත් මේ බජට් අයවැය තියෙනවා non tax revenue කියලා කැටගරි එකක්. බදු නොවන ආදායම් කියලා. ඒකේ ලොකුම දායකත්වයක් ලැබෙන්නේ ඔය ටෙලිකොම් සෙක්ටර් එකේ. ටෙලිකොම් සෙක්ටර් එකෙන් ලැබෙනවා දායකත්වය දෙආකාරයකට. එකක් තමයි අර විදුලි සංදේශ කොමිෂන් සභාව නැමැති මේ ඒකත් මේ ස්ටේට් ඕන් එන්ටර්ප්‍රයිස් කියන ගණයට වැටෙන්නේ. ඒක අර එක බලපත්‍ර වලට විදුලි සංඛ්‍යාත ඒව මේවට අය කරන ගණන් බිලියන් ගණක් ආණ්ඩුවට දෙනවා. අනිත් පැත්තෙන් ශ්‍රී ලංකා ටෙලිකොම් ආයතනයත් ලාභාංශ කියලා ආණ්ඩුවට දෙනවා. එතකොට අපිට එතනින් කහ ගන්න පුළුවන් පාඩමක් තමයි අපි හරියාකාරයකට මේ ප්‍රතිසංස්කරණයන් කරොත් ආණ්ඩුවට ලාභයක් ලැබෙනවා, ආදායම් ලැබෙනවා. එහෙම නැත්නම් මේ පාඩු දරන්න වෙන්නේ නැහැ කියන එක. ඊළඟට මම ලියලා තියෙනවා මේ මෑත කාලේ විශේෂයෙන් මේ ඉන්දියාවේ සිවිච්ච සිදුවීම අල්ලලා ඉන්දියාවේ තිබුණා ගුවන් යානා සේවයක් එයා ඉන්දියා කියලා. ඒක විවිධාකාර විදිහට ප්‍රතිසංවිධානය කරලා ඕමේව කරලා අපි අන්තිමට ගත්තොත් එයා ඉන්දියා කියලා තියෙනවා. දවසට ඇමරිකානු ඩොලර් මිලියන 3ක් පාඩුයි දවසට. එතකොට අපේ එක ගත්තොත් ඒක ගණන් හදන විදි තියෙනවා. ඉතින් අනුකම්පාවක් රහිතව නම් මම මේ 20යි 21 හරි 20යි 20 වර්ෂයේ විතරක් ගන්නවා. එතකොට ඊටත් වැඩි. නමුත් මම අවුරුදු 3ක් අරගෙන බැලුවාම ලංකාවේ රුපියල් වලින් මිලියන 99ක් හෝ ඊට වැඩි ගාණක් ඒ ගන්න ප්‍රතිශතය අනුව අපිට ගණන් හදලා බලපෙන්නත් හැකි. ඒ සාමාන්‍යයෙන් මහ විශාල මුදලක් දවසට පාඩු වෙනවා. එතකොට මෙතෙක් කල් වුණු පාඩුන් ගැන අපි අමතක කරලා බැලුවොත් අපි ආර්ථික විද්‍යාවේ සාමාන්‍යයෙන් අපි ඉදිරිය බලන જાතියක්. අපි ඉදිරියේ ලැබෙන දරන්න වෙන පාඩු වලින් වළකින්නේ කෙසේද කියන එක ගැන අපිට කතා කරන්න පුළුවන්. ඒ වගේම මම සුවිශේෂ විදිහට බලලා තියෙනවා මගේ ක්ෂේත්‍රයේ යටිතල පහසුකම් නිසා විදුලි පද්ධතිය ගැන, ඒ වගේම ජල පද්ධතිය ගැන. විදුලි පද්ධතිය ගැන බැලුවොත් මම ඒ කටයුතු බාරව ඉන්නකොට ආර්ථික ප්‍රසංස්කරණ අමාත්‍යාංශයේ අර මෙහෙයුම් මධ්‍යස්ථානයේ අඩුපාඩු තියෙනවා කියලා මම දැනගෙන හිටියා. ඉතින් අර නේෂන් වයිඩ් රට පුරා ඇඳිරිය වැටෙනකොට මුළු පද්ධතියම කඩා වැටෙනවා. මේක බොහොම අසාමාන්‍ය දෙයක්. ඕනෑම පද්ධතියක් මේ මුළු රට පුරාම කඩා වැටෙන එක. මම හොයලා බැලුවා මොකක්ද අර කන්ට්‍රෝල් සෙන්ටර් එකට වෙලා තිබ්බේ කියලා. 2014 වෙනකම් මේ ප්‍රශ්නයක් දැනගෙන ඒ ගැන කිසි දෙයක් කරලා තිබ්බේ නැහැ. අන්තිමට ඒ කන්ට්‍රෝල් සෙන්ටර් එක අර පැලවත්තේ තියෙන්නේ 2016-17 අවුරුද්ද තමයි ක්‍රියාත්මක වුණේ. ඒ කාලෙම මම ලියු ලිපියක තියෙනවා මේ බියගම සබ්ස්ටේෂන් එක සහ ওই ග්‍රිඩ් එකේ තියෙන දුර්වලතාවය ගැන. ඉතින් මේ මම පිටේ ඉන්න මිනිහෙක්, මම ආණ්ඩුවෙන් පිටේ ඉන්න මිනිහෙක් මේවා ගැන ලියනවා නම් ඒගොල්ලෝ දන්නේ නැද්ද? ඒගොල්ලෝ දන්නවා. නමුත් ඒව ගැන කිසි දෙයක් කරන්නේ නැහැ. ඒ කරන්නේ නැතුව ඊළඟට අපි සියලු දෙනාම අඳුරේ අදත් ඔබතුමන්ලා ගෙදර ගියාම ඕගොල්ලන්ටත් පැයක් අද ලයිට් නැහැ. මේක තමයි මේ රාජ්‍ය ව්‍යවසායයන්ගේ ආධිනව. මේ තමයි කරුමේ. මේ තමයි උරචක්‍රමාලේ. මේක තමයි අපිට තියෙන ප්‍රශ්නේ. අවසාන වශයෙන් මට කියන්න තියෙන මට තව කතා කරන්න පුළුවන් රාජ්‍ය ව්‍යවසායයන් ගැන. මම ඒවායේ ප්‍රධානීක හැටියට ඉඳලා තියෙනවා. ඔය ගිනුම් හදලා තියෙනවා. තවත් දෙයක් කියන්න පුළුවන් මේ ගිනුම් වල ප්‍රශ්න තියෙනවා. ඒව ගැනත් අපිට කතා කරන්න පුළුවන්. මූලික වශයෙන් අපේ ආර්ථික අර්බුදය ඉතාමත්ම නරක තත්වයක තියෙන්නේ. ඒක අමතක කරන්න එපා කවුරුවත්. මේ පොඩි කිනිත්තීම් නෙමෙයි. එන අවුරුද්ද වෙනකොට වදින්නේ හොම්බට. ඒකට හේතු දෙකක් තියෙනවා. අපි ඒකට කියනවා ට්වින් ඩෙෆිසිට්ස් කියලා. නිදහස ලැබපු දා ඉඳන්ම අපි ආදායම් වියදම් කළමනා කරගත්තේ නැති જાතියක්. අවුරුදු දෙකයි අපිට පොසිටිව් නම්බරයක් තිබිලා තියෙන්නේ. ඒකේ තියෙන ප්‍රශ්න මම ඒක සංකීර්ණව කතා කරන්නේ. ඒකේ තියෙන ප්‍රශ්න නිසා අද අපේ ණය ශ්‍රේණිගත කිරීම ඊටාම දුර්වල තත්ත්වයකට වැටලා තියෙනවා. ඒ නිසා අපිට විදේශ ණය ගන්න බෑ. අපේ අනිත් පරතරේ පියව ගන්න. ඒ කියන්නේ විදේශ ඒ කරන්ට් account deficit එක. මේක IMF ආවත් දෙයයන්න්සේ ආවත් කවුරු ආවත් මේකට අපි පිළියමක් ගත යුතුයි. IMF එකට බැන් ඉඳලා හරියන්නේ නැහැ. මේකට පිළියමක් අපි ගන්න ඕන. ඒ පිළියම තමයි අපි අපේ අයවැය කළමනාකරණය කරගන්න ඕනේ. මේ අර්බුදකාරී තත්ත්වය යටතේ අපිට ආදායම් වැඩි කරගන්න යථාර්ථවාදී ප්‍රභවයක් නැහැ. මේ වෙලාවේ ආදායම් වැඩි කරන්න ගියොත් ආර්ථිකය තවත් විනාශ වෙනවා. ඒ නිසා අපිට මේ වෙලාවේ කරන්න තියෙන්නේ වියදම් අඩු කිරීම. වියදම් අඩු කිරීමට තියෙන හොඳම දෙයක් තමයි ඊළඟට අපේ ඒ පිළිබඳ තියෙන කැපවීම අපි ඒක බැරෑරුම් ලෙස ගන්නවා කියන එක ඒක sannivedanaya කිරීමේ හැකියාව තියෙන්නේ ඔය ශ්‍රී ලංකන් එයාර්ලයින්ස් වගේ හොඳ හැට කනට පේන එකක් පුද්ගලීකරණය කරලා දැම්මා. බොහොම ස්තුතියි.
බොහොම ස්තුතියි ආචාර්ය සමරජීව. Over to you, Dr. Sarath Rajpatirana.
Yeah. My remarks are not on a particular SOE, but on a general. What I will do is I'll give a little history, talk about some other countries have been doing this, and what our challenge is. And I agree everything that Professor Samarajee has told us. In some things that he will know much in more detail than I would be able to do. Before I start, I'll say I got the notes of Dr. Roshan Pereira has been very helpful for me to do this. So I want to acknowledge that to her. So what happened is that I'll bring, first of all, we started in 1956 after the revolution when Mr. Bandaranaike became Prime Minister. He was what one would call a lot of influence on the English UK system of government, UK system of corporations. He was a Fabian socialist. But he listened a lot also to Mr. Nehru, who was more hardcore socialist, followed in sort of Russian system. So then we had another episode. Under him, he started public enterprises. And then when Mrs. Bandaranaike became Prime Minister in 1977, she expanded the scope of those. She created new enterprises and took some more, nationalized some other enterprises, etc. So we have a sort of a history going back to that period. Then we have the same situation where there was no evaluation when we opened up these, when we established these institutions. There was nobody did evaluation whether this will make any profits or what is the rate of return to these assets, nothing. So many of them should not have been started. We didn't have competitive advantage in to do those things, like Steel Corporation. There are many of those that did not have this advantage that would have been necessary to compete, particularly since the world was coming closer. There are greater competition in the world. So we started and we in a way failed at the very beginning. And then before then public enterprises became the way to go. All the activities came under either directly or related to public enterprises. So that's why we see, for example, public enterprises were much larger than the private enterprises. I mean, somebody compared one of the public enterprises which was 5 times as large as John Keel's. So we are now, because their performance is very important to, as Professor Samarajee said, for our outcome of this current situation. Then second, also they have sort of a relationship to the banks, because every time they had a loss, the government was ready to rescue them by giving them accommodation. They were called very conveniently letters of comfort, and I saw them pass through my desk many times in my last job. So we have this, we already talked about the 5 state enterprise, 55 enterprises of which we have some numbers, but many which we don't have. And all this means is that we have very poor productivity. Actually, for a very long period, Sri Lankan total factor productivity was for 30 years or so less than 1%. So one reason why our total factor productivity means the addition to GDP from factors that is land, labor, capital, when you take that out from technology and other things, it's very low. And it is in severe contrast to countries done very well like South Korea, even now Vietnam today. And we had one period after the liberalization, there was a jump in productivity, but we couldn't maintain it. And also we have this situation where we are, for some reason, reforms, our output goes up, GDP goes up, then it's not sustained. Even when we had in 2010, 9%, 10% jump in the GDP, it lasted less than 4 or 5 years. That is because it's not based on productivity. So if you want to have permanent change in your GDP rate, make sure you have productivity increase. And the other side of the coin is that if you depend on factors, land, labor and capital, you have to keep on saving more and more. And if you don't have, then also you have to cut down consumption in order to finance that type of investment. So we are in a situation, as Vimanga said, and Professor Samarjeev had said, we are in a very crucial situation. This is one good place to start the reform program. And many times leaders all over the world that I have followed in different parts of the world have said very simple statement, reform or perish. That turns out to be true. I'll give you one little reform that went a long way in Argentina. Argentina railway system called Ferrocarriles had so many workers, so many, probably 20, 30 people per train that they had, similar to our Air Lanka situation. They changed one practice only one practice. They issued photo IDs. After photo IDs were used and people went to collect their salaries, there was a 25% jump in the revenues of that operation. So all the ghost workers had disappeared. Simple things can do it. So I think the thing is to do a good, what we call even a forensic type of a situation, for take a sample of these things, go even further than what we have gone, and we'll see that a lot of things we can do in order to improve the situation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Rajpatrana. I now invite Ms. Anarkali Munasinghe to present her introductory remarks.
Thank you both. So my perspective is really from a private sector perspective because I come from an investment banking background. And from the time that I've been in it, privatizations, whether it was in Europe or then in East Asia and then in India, have been one way that governments have looked at what are two main objectives. One was to reduce the subsidies to these state-owned enterprises, and the other was to improve efficiency. I think as we've seen, as we've gone through time, these privatizations are not one model and one size fits all. It's different in different countries and different models, and it's different in different sectors. As Professor Samarjeev very clearly illustrated, it has been very successful for us in the case of telecommunications industry. We have a good regulator and we have competition. So that has led to efficiency and for people to have access to technology, which has really tremendously changed what we have in this country. So I think we have to look at this opportunity for us to look at various forms of what privatization could be. Whether you look at listing via the stock market, our stock market could use large capital companies that are owned by the government today, and it gives people an ownership. It broad bases our ownership so that the average person is able to actually directly own a part of these enterprises rather than either your taxpayer money or your EPF, ETF money being taken into these entities, right? So, if you look at SLIC, great opportunity to list that as well as many of the subsidiaries that it has. If you look at the two state banks, potentially, they also large entities that would really drive and fundamentally change our stock market. If you look at many of the East Asian countries, their example of driving their capital markets really came from a program and a pipeline that was from the government enterprises. This is not so easy because also they have to be corporatized, so to say, first. They have to be efficient in themselves, they have to learn to be disciplined, and then only can they be market players. So it's, and I think the other thing that's key, when you see it from the TRC side, is a strong regulator is very, very important. Just taking something and putting it out there and saying, oh, we went from public to private, doesn't necessarily work unless you have good regulators, a good framework, as well as competition. Those three elements, I think, are quite key to making this successful. But as both gentlemen have pointed out, we are in a position today in Sri Lanka where we really have to look at these as potential solutions to the crisis we're in, and we have to we have to seize that opportunity today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Munsingha. Now we open the floor for questions from the members of the press present here today. I'd like to kindly remind you to limit your questions to the topic at hand today, which is state-owned enterprises and much-needed reforms. Thank you.
What you said in English for the benefit of the English papers.
Well, if I remember what I said. I said that if you look at the list of state enterprises, it should, if we were having this exercise in 1997, we would have seen Sri Lanka Telecom, which had been made into a company by that time, also in the list, and most likely making losses and not providing good service. Instead, it was privatized under the leadership of the late Minister Mangala Samaravira, and it is even today contributing, in addition to providing all of us with various good services and employees with more than, right at the outset, more than double what they were earning earlier. It is also providing the government with dividend revenue. In addition, because the market was opened up, there is an entity called the Telecommunication Regulatory Commission, which I headed from 98 when we set it up. We collect spectrum fees, license fees, various kinds of fees. And while I generally don't agree with treating regulatory authorities as revenue generating units, this thing actually generates billions of revenue, very reliable revenue into the government. So you can sort of see that reform is not a bad thing. We have a living experience in a particular sector. Moving on to other areas, what I also talked about was that with regard to the Ceylon Electricity Board, which is the largest entity in this country after the army in terms of employees, asset value, everything you can think of. It's an enormous enterprise. It is a state-owned monopoly, and you have seen that it doesn't make a lot of money. And they will come back and say, well, we are not making money because they are not allowing us to raise tariffs. But there are tremendous inefficiencies in there, and they are also inept, and they are causing us problems. A country that goes into nationwide blackouts periodically is extraordinarily unusual. You can have a blackout in a little suburb, in an area. A whole country doesn't go down like this. This is insane. And this is not the first time it has happened. It has happened over and over again. And we know the reasons. So when I had responsibilities for electricity reforms back in 2002, 2004, I was looking at this, and I actually sent one of my consultants to look at the control center, which was then in Dematagoda. And it was the guy came back and said, you have very clever engineers. I have no idea how they managed to work this, because this was so obsolete. So the CEB knew this. They knew there was a problem. We all knew there was a problem. So when we had a blackout in 2016 or something, nationwide blackout, I can remember going on TV with a person who had just retired from CEB, Mr. Tilakasiri. And I said, what about this? Because I had already checked. I said, why did it take till 2014 for you to get the procurement started? Yeah, we couldn't get the procurement started, etc., etc. So now we have a new control center. But right there in that discussion itself, in an article that I wrote back in 2016 or 2017, I have identified, I'm not an electrical engineer, I'm an outsider, I'm an infrastructure guy, right? I identified the Biyagama substation as a vulnerability because that's where we have nationwide blackouts. 2016, what are we doing today, 21, still talking about the Biyagama substation? We know the answers, we know the solutions to these things. But these big, ponderous government enterprises are not responsive to our needs. And because they are not responsive, you will go home today and you will have a blackout of 1 hour because they are load shedding during peak. So the basic issue is that this country is suffering from a twin deficit. From independence, we have had positive balances on our government revenues and expenditures, only 2 years. We have been continually essentially running government at a loss. And because we are not managing it and because this is almost out of control, the international rating agencies have lowered our credit rating and we can't even take loans from outside in order to manage our other deficit, which is the current account deficit. So if we are to solve this problem, we shouldn't be bad-mouthing the IMF for arguing about it or whatever, but we should at least get started on addressing the core problem. In this current situation, it is not possible for us to raise revenues radically, even though Mr. Rajapaksa has tried. I personally don't think quite a lot of those revenue projections will come to fruition within 1 year. It's not possible. What you have to do is to cut costs, cut the expense side in order to balance the budget. We will communicate a strong message of responsibility, of commitment to anybody who has given us loans and say, this is the kind of country we should negotiate with because they are serious about their economic problems and they are solving them. So that is the short message, if I recall correctly, I said in Sinhala.
Thank you, Professor Samarjeeva. ඔබට තියෙන ප්‍රශ්න ඉදිරිපත් කිරීමටයි දැන් අවස්ථාව. Can we please get a microphone here?
Sri Lankan Airways was mentioned as one of the enterprises that are having significant losses. Now, Sri Lankan Airways was, at one time, a profit-making concern when they were managed by Emirates. Now, if they could have done it at that time, why couldn't you do it now? That is one question I'd like to ask. Also, you have mentioned Vietnam. Also, during that time, the US had dropped billions of bombs on Vietnam. And after the end of the Vietnam War, now Vietnam is an enterprise of profit-making concern, and people are going to Vietnam to borrow money as much as we have. Laos as well. And also, we are borrowing money from Bangladesh. Bangladesh was born yesterday. Now, based on all of that, how is it and why have we gone wrong? One more aspect I'd like to bring to the discussion is private enterprise does run at a profit. If private enterprise does not run at a profit, somebody gets sacked and ensures that the enterprise runs well. If nobody gets sacked, they close down, and that's it. So, based on what I have just told you, I'd like a few answers to those questions, please.
If you don't mind, I'll take the Sri Lankan part. My colleagues will answer the rest of the questions. Is that good arrangement? So, I think you may have read that when President Jayawardena asked Lee Kuan Yew for help in setting up an airline, he said, you really shouldn't do it. What we should have done was focus on an airport. That was the way we could have capitalized on our location. But anyway, JR wanted to take a dead airline called Air Ceylon, and he made it to Air Lanka, and it was losing money. UL stood for usually late, and not because people were bad, but because their equipment was old and it had to be maintained. And you'd get on the plane and they'd still be repairing it. Now, one of the things that happened with a state-owned airline is that there is no discipline. I am telling you things I'm a frequent traveler, I'm telling you things from my observations. I have been standing in line in the business class counter when I have seen ministers, deputy ministers, state ministers, we have hundreds of these people, who come with, I cannot imagine the amount of luggage that they're carrying. And they are waved through. When that is revenue, that is actual additional fuel costs. And we don't do that because these are our political masters. You all know the reason why Emirates was asked to leave, why its CEO was declared persona non grata and his work visa revoked. That was because he was not willing to clear the entirety of the business class flight to London so that the Prime Minister's or President's security staff could go travel with the President. So they had cleared the space for the President and a few other people, but they didn't clear the whole of it. Now, if they cleared the whole of it, and I had a ticket there, would I fly that airline again, where I had a confirmed business class ticket and I had a meeting in X number of hours, and with no reason being given, I'm thrown out of business class? Would I travel on that airline again? I had already, by the time this was, well, not when it was under Emirates, but with other, when it was under government, I generally tell my travel agent, that's the last resort. If you can't find anything else, run me on that airline. Because of these problems, right? So there are a whole host of things like that, that it's not simply about getting a good CEO or a chairman. It's a whole organizational culture that is the problem. And as I said, I think what we should do is look forward rather than backward. Today, when we sold 40% of Sri Lankan Airlines, we were able to get, my recollection is correct, I hope, $80 million from Emirates back in 98, 99. There is no way that you're going to get that kind of money because now this is an airline with a black mark against it. It was a place where it was privatized and the investor was abused. So many people have told me that we'll have to give away this airline. And that is in fact what happened in India. It was more or less given away. If you look at they had debts of $8 billion, of which only $2 billion was taken by the Tatas. $6 billion had to be swallowed by the government. And what Tatas gave for 100 plus airlines, aircraft, etc., Heathrow landing spots all over the world, etc., huge route network. These are all valuable things, right? Air India is still a valuable brand. They paid some pittance. I've written about it. It's in the papers, what they paid. So it'll have to be on that scale. So that is why I say what we should do is not look back at the past and say, from the last so many years' experience, good years, bad years, years with bombs, years without bombs, years with wars, years that were peaceful, we have not been able to make money from this. We have been hemorrhaging money. How do we prevent the hemorrhaging of money in the future? Sell it. That is the benefit, the avoidance of loss.
Mr. Morel, on Vietnam. I have worked on Vietnam. I used to go and teach there in summer also. I think you start with the people, extremely clever people. So if you are going on a Sunday to a bookstore, all the kids are around mathematics and computer science parts of the bookstore. And when I taught, they picked up very easily because very bright. They had the mathematics. They picked up English. If you are a foreigner, they see somebody speaking English, they want to come and engage with you to learn the language. Very clever people, number one. Number two is that what really triggered their growth was that they were very keen to, after the war, they were very keen to be a player, successful player in Southeast Asia, and they forgot about the war. Actually, the Americans became their closest friends. So they are so far ahead thinking that a lot of people, Americans went and invested there, helped them in the WTO negotiations. And the guy who conducted the negotiation told me, he said, Sarath, we should have asked for more things when we entered WTO to discipline the the Vietnamese government. There are people who are very trained, have gone to very good schools in the US and UK, becoming members of these institutions. And they really didn't have our type of, as you describe, enterprise, public enterprises. They were government run. There were no enterprises. There was no pretense there during that earlier period when it was under communists. And actually the governor, the man in charge of the South, once told me, he said, Sarath, if they get off our back, they had something remaining things about politics, we will be teaching China how to grow. Actually, they could do it. Already they are replacing China in many of the things. Now they are into technology. They'll be producing microchips on a larger scale. They'll be competing with Taiwan. They have become the second largest coffee producer after Brazil. So there's such a collection of achievement that they have had. And the thing is that the Communist Party does not interfere with the economic arrangements. They still have few things to do about enterprises, not the type of public enterprise, some of the government-run operations. But I think that the leadership is very, very committed, very smart, and they are prepared to learn from everybody. I think they'll do even better than what they have been doing, and you see the signs of it already. That's my story on Vietnam.
Thank you very much, Dr. Rajpatrana. Ms. Munasinghe, would you like to add to that?
So I think your last question was on what happens if you have losses and inefficiencies, that people should lose their jobs, right? Or the company closes. So typically, yes, that's what happens in the private sector. That doesn't happen in our public enterprises because we see them as a social need, and they have such large numbers of employees that to just say, right, if you don't make money, we're going to shut you down, there is no government that has the political will to do that. So we have to figure out solutions, because we're so far down the road with these, right? Many of these were either formed or privatized in the 60s and 70s. So it's not a overnight solution, like saying, and they will never do it while they're left within the government sector and while somebody is there to always support them financially, right? At the end of the day, if you make losses, the Treasury and the banks, the state banks, support you unconditionally. So that has to be cut off in order for them to stand on their 2 feet and then actually be held to the norms that any other private corporation or company would be held to. I don't know if that answers your question.
Do we have any more questions?
Coming back to exactly what you said, let's assume that the private sector is doing well. And let's assume that the private sector is producing. And the public sector and the state enterprises are not. Is it that the state enterprises are not capable of doing that? But in having said that, the state enterprises all have got the best brains in this country. Let's face that. Now, having that amount of intellectual expertise in the state sector, why is it that they cannot get a job done as efficiently as the private sector? I have a few more questions, but I'll leave it at that.
I think I answered it, so I think I'll be very brief. I gave examples from the electricity board. I think there are people there are extraordinarily intelligent, very sharp people. I was I've had many friends in the university and engineering faculties, and it's the best and the brightest to do electrical, at least in my time period. But I gave you examples of fundamental flaws, absolutely fundamental flaws, being known and nothing being done about them. And now you know the newest one, which is all these bids being accepted, proposals being accepted for renewable energy, when the grid is nowhere near capable of absorbing this energy that is going to come in. So why are the best and the brightest not making up plans to develop the grid? Why is it that we don't have that? Because it's the system. I think it's a system. It's not individual behavior that is driving it. It's the system, which is why we say it needs to be restructured. The incentives have to be changed. Yugoslavia tried this kind of stuff with state-owned enterprises. And because state-owned enterprises do not have hard budget constraints, they are not disciplined.
The system that you speak of, Dr. Samarajiva, is made and done by people. Now, why can't...
So SLT as a system.
Hang on. Now, why can't these same people change these systems that are already ingrained?
No,
you can change for something better, couldn't you?
I could go back to teaching social theory and I could tell you about systems and structures and behavioral incentives versus structural constraints. I'd rather not do that. I'm just telling you, I'm just illustrating to you that you can take the Sri Lanka telecom system, same engineers, and what did they do? They put people on 10-year waiting lists. You take that same company after privatization with competition, and they were banging on your door trying to give you telephones. That's the difference. Same people, different system.
Thank you, Professor Samarajiva. Are there any other questions that we can take? Can we get a microphone there, please?
To maybe add some explanation to that. The problem of incentives, when a business is run by the government, it's accountable to the politician. What is the politician's incentive? He wants to get re-elected. In order to get re-elected, he needs to give jobs. So therefore, he gives jobs to all his party supporters and the guys who worked on his campaign. Then he needs to raise money for his election campaign. So therefore, he runs contracts into that company or spends all the money that the enterprise has on his personal propaganda, or he uses the vehicles, he uses the equipment and the personnel that he has hired in to run his election campaign. So their focus, they have not invested their money, they are investing taxpayers' money. Right, so my incentives as a politician are completely different from an investor's incentives in running a business. So the moment you change the ownership structure and get people who are putting their own money into running a business, the structure changes. So that's all that happens. So in telecoms, in other things, when the ownership changes, when the banks put money in, when shareholders put money in, if you list these things on the stock exchange and have them transparent and accountable to individual shareholders, people see what's happening. People's money is at stake. The banks have a stake in it. Then they start demanding a return. When it's the government in charge and a politician there, and the treasury is underwriting everything with a blank check, it doesn't work.
Ladies and gentlemen, we are still open for more questions. Just a gentle reminder, please phrase your questions as questions and not comments. We still have about 15 to 20 more minutes, so we would be interested in taking more questions. Satya?
ඔබට ඔබගේ ප්‍රශ්න අහන්න තවත් අවස්ථාවක් අපිට මයික්‍රොෆෝන් එකක් ගන්න පුළුවන් එතනට.
Yeah. Can you be like this state-owned enterprises making loss is a topic which is spoken over the years for a long time, and Ms. Mona Singh has said that it doesn't fit for all the organization, right? So can you be specifically say what kind of a restructuring you are looking for what percentage of a restructuring, say for Ceylon Electricity Board, what kind of a restructuring of privatization you are looking for? Can you be specific on, with regard to the different industries, at least for 2 or 3 sectors, if you can?
Talk about the electricity board, which I have referred to. I don't even think it's a full privatization that is required. Even today, more than 50%, depending on how you count it, depending on how much rain there is, of the generating capacity comes from the private sector, right? The transmission, the big grid, is the true source of monopoly in this. It's where we need planning, it's where we need efficiency, it's the heart of the system. Now, there are countries that have privatized their grids. I'm not advocating that. I am on record. I have written in my writing, I have said I'm not advocating that. I'm saying break it up, give it its autonomy so that it can actually manage itself better. Then we have the question of the distribution companies. That is when they step it down to low voltages and they're dealing with us for billing and various other purposes. You have take a look at LECO. Generally speaking, LECO is more responsive, more efficient, etc., in terms of dealing with customers. So if you can have a number of LECOs, that is at the distribution end, and if you can have benchmarking, if you structure them properly, and if you can benchmark them against each other with a good regulator, right? Without privatization, you can still improve performance. Now, there are places like Delhi, like Mumbai, where the distribution has been given to private companies. And I have looked at their billing systems, I have looked at their bills, etc. Hey, night and day. You know, I mean, they have incentives of different kinds about, for example, demand-side management to reduce the demand at the peak and so on and so forth. So those have to be done with a regulator because this is not a perfect market that we are talking about, right? But I'm saying at least save us from these nationwide blackouts. Do something about the central, most vital grid. Keep it under government ownership, but at least make it accountable, right? So there's a whole series of things that we can talk about there. Is that enough? Now, what does accountability mean? I have read in the central bank reports that the NWSTB, National Water Supply and Drainage Board, has made a profit in one particular year, 500 million or some small amount. I have also read in government official documents that in that particular year, all their loan repayments, interest payments were absorbed by Treasury. Now, I ask you, in which planet do you say a company is making profit when it hasn't paid its cost of capital? Now, you can tell me, why are it's government policy to give government guaranteed loans from the domestic banks to the NWSTB, right? That's been government policy for many years. Now, in this situation, they are giving us accounts. They're telling the central bank that they're making profits when they have not paid 1 cent. And their interest and loan payments was like 20 billion or something. That's 500 million. What are we talking about, right? So when I say there's no transparency, I think Ms. Munasinghe will be able to say more on this. When you're a listed company, the requirements, the reporting requirements, the accounting standards are rigorous. They're not so in these companies. I would invite you. I have studied their books. They drive me crazy, right? Go look at these things. Even if they have anything called an annual report, it's not necessarily correct information, right? I gave you one example. I don't just make allegations. I give examples, right? So situations like this, we can, with a good regulatory system, one of the most important things about regulation, I teach regulation all over the world. One of the most important things in regulation is, we say information is the oxygen of regulation. How do we generate accurate, credible information that a regulator can rely on? We have uniform systems of accounts. We compel them to, under penalty, to report that information in that particular form. And we must be able to compare. So if you don't have the hard budget constraints of private ownership, we must be able to compare and exert pressure on them. So we should be saying, why is it that in the northern whatever distribution company, they are doing, their losses are this little, and in the southern one, they are losing 8 times as much. What is wrong with you people, right? We get diagnostic information. So in order to do that, we must have separate standing companies, and we have to have good regulatory schemes. So those are the kinds of things that can be done. Now, there's another form that, again, I hope Ms. Munasinghe will go into detail about, the whole question of listing and a holding company like Temasek. Now, I've written many articles on this, saying the Temasek model has to be carefully adapted, because Bhutan adopted it to a Druk holding company, and it was a dismal failure. What works in Singapore doesn't always work in other countries, right? One of the reasons was Bhutan doesn't have a stock market. So in Singapore, all these companies have shares that are traded in the stock market, and the price that is fetched there goes into the KPIs of the people who are managing them, right? You can't ask them to produce more and more profit year after year, because then you have to be some kind of horrible monopoly to do that. But the stock market performance is a reasonable indicator. So there are a whole series of things that we can talk about with regard to Temasek-like structures. I'm not against them. I'm saying we should take them with caution and apply them carefully, ideally with a small number of companies, float them in the stock market, see how it works, then gradually expand it. Anarkali, maybe you...
Yeah, I think, sorry.
Sri Lanka? No, Sri Lanka, but please understand what I'm talking about. Electricity has got features of large economies of scale and possibly merging into forms of natural monopoly. In economic terms, we don't really think about true competition working in electricity. Sri Lankan Airlines is in a competitive marketplace, underlined. It is in a competitive marketplace. It's only government officials who are compelled to travel on that airline. Nobody else is compelled to go for the lowest price. So they're competing internationally. Now, breaking it up and giving various people titles and giving them additional allowances is going to do nothing. My friend Sarath says nothing. I agree.
Nothing, because I seen many airlines in the world, and we could do a very good job, but we don't do it because, for example, if you look at some ratio of workers to aircrafts, among the highest in the world, okay? So what are these people doing? Actually, finally, they made money out of the catering business. So that was put into the ground operation. Yeah, right.
Yeah, those should be spun off. I would agree.
Yeah, they should be spun off.
Those should be spun off, and we should see their profits completely separate. They can go into the stock market easy. Yeah. There's a question from there, I think.
Yeah, I think we had a question over there.
Advise that Sri Lanka seeks assistance from the IMF, especially in terms of state-owned enterprises?
No. IMF is a debt restructuring arrangement. It's not about state-owned enterprise. I think we should just look after our own house. We don't need anybody's help to look after our own house. We've got damaging elements in our own economy. Let's look after them.
Thank you, Professor Samarajeva. Do we have any more questions? I think we have one more question there. Yes, go ahead, please.
හුඟක් කතා වෙන දෙයක් තමයි ලංකාවේ ණයබර ඇත්තටම ලංකාවේ තියෙන ලොකු ආර්ථික ප්‍රශ්නයක්. ඒකට අපිට දැනගන්න පුළුවන්ද මේ රජයේ සතු ව්‍යාපාර ඒ ණය ප්‍රශ්නෙට කොච්චර ලොකු දායකත්වයක් දක්වනවද කියන එක ගැන?
දැන් මෙහෙමයි. ප්‍රධාන වශයෙන් අපේ ණය ප්‍රශ්නේ ඇති වෙලා තියෙන්නේ අපි අවුරුදු ගාණක් තිස්සේ විවිධ වර්ගයේ ණය විශේෂයෙන් අර ISP කියලා කියන ඒ වාණිජ ණය අරගෙන තියෙනවා ඉහළ පොලි අනුපාත වලට. ඒවා අරන් තියෙනවා. එතකොට ඕවා ගෙවීම සඳහා ඒ නිසි ණය කළමනාකරණය සඳහා කාලෙන් කාලයට අපිට තවත් ණය ගන්නට වෙනවා. ඒ මේ ණය අරගෙන අනිත් ණය පියවලා මේක පාලනය කරගන්න ඕනේ. මේක හැමදාම කරන්න පුළුවන් දෙයක් නෙමෙයි. නමුත් ඒක නිසි ලෙස කළමනාකර ගැනීමට අපිට ඒක අවශ්‍යතාවයක් තියෙනවා. අපිට වෙලා තියෙන්නේ 2019 අපේ බදු ආදායම විශාල මුදලකින් 3/1කින් විතර අඩු කරගත්තායින් පස්සේ ආණ්ඩුව මොනියම් හේතුවකට අපි ඒක ගැන කතා කරන්න ඕනේ නැහැ දැන් මොනියම් හේතුවකට අඩු කරගත්තායින් පස්සේ ඒ අඩු කිරීමේ සිග්නල් එක නිසා ශ්‍රේණිගත කිරීමේ ආයතන අපිව දැම්ම පල්ලෙහාටම අපි කොහොමද ටිකක් ණය වැඩි වෙලා හිටියේ තමයි. නමුත් මේක මේ මිනිස්සුන් ගෙවා ගන්න විදිහක් නැහැ. මිනිස්සු කිසිම අවංක උත්සාහයක් නැහැ මේක ගෙවා ගන්න කියන තත්ත්වයට යටතේ අපිව ශ්‍රේණිගත කිරීමෙන් අඩු කරා. ඊළඟට මේ කොවිඩ් වසංගතය ආවා. මේ තත්ත්වයේ යටතේ අපිට තියෙනවා විශාල ණය ප්‍රශ්නයක්. ඒ ණය ප්‍රශ්නේ ගැඹුර ඒකේ බැලුම්කම අපිට තවම තේරිලා නැහැ. මම ඔබතුමන්ලාට අද කියනවා තව මාස 3-4කින් බලන්න මේ දැන් තියෙන කෙනිත්තීම් මොනවද කියලා තේරෙයි. හරි? ඒක එනවා. දැන් අපි ඒකෙන් මිදීමට නම් අපේ නිගමනයක් තියෙනවා. මේ අර මෙහෙන් ඉන්න මහත්මයාගේ ප්‍රශ්නත් එක්ක මම මේ උත්තර දෙන්නේ. අපේ නිගමනයක් තියෙනවා මේ ණය ප්‍රතිව්‍යුහගත කළ යුතුයි කියලා. ප්‍රතිව්‍යුහගත කිරීම කියන එක ඒකේ සංකීර්ණ ස්වරූපයක් තියෙනවා. ඒක මූලික වශයෙන් අපි කියන්නේ අපිට 10 පොලකින් ණය අරන් තියෙනවා නම් එක එක විදිහේ පොලි අනුපාත ගෙවීම් පද ක්‍රම රෝමේව යටතේ අපි මේ සීලම දෙනා මේෂක වාඩි කරලා අපි කියනවා අපිට තියෙන හැකියාව මේකයි. අපි මේක දෙගොල්ලෝ සහයෝගයෙන් මේක කරමු. ඔය සියලු දෙනාගේම අපි ණය ගෙවන්නම්. නමුත් අපිට ටිකක් කල් ඕනේ. ඒක සාමාන්‍ය මනුෂ්‍ය ක්‍රමයක්. ඒක මේ අපි පළවෙනි පාර නෙමෙයි කරන්නේ. ඕකේ තියෙන තව වැරාරුණු ස්වරූප තියෙනවා. හෙයා කට් කියලා තියෙනවා. එතකොට අර ලැබෙන මුදල එහෙම් පිටින්ම හම්බෙන්නේ නැහැ. එතකොට ඒගොල්ලෝ නිගමනයක් ගන්නවා. මුළු රුපියලම මුළු ඩොලරේම හම්බෙන්නේ නැති වෙලා යනකොට වැඩිය හොඳයි. ඩොලර් 7-5ක් පාඩු වෙච්ච එක. යනාදී වශයෙන් ඔය ණය ප්‍රතිව්‍යුහගතෙන් කිරීම තියෙනවා. එතෙන්දී අර විශ්වසනීයත්වයේ පිළිබඳ ප්‍රශ්නයක් එනවා. මේ මිනිස්සයා මේ රට මේ කියන වගකීම් ඉටු කරයිද? විශ්වසනීය ලෙස. අපි IMF ආයතනයට එන්න කියලා කියන්නේ ඒ ආයම මේ විශ්වසනීයත්වයට ලොකු පිටිවහලක් ලැබෙනවා. නමුත් මම කියන්නේ අපේ රට මේ වෙන කවුරුවකින් උපදෙස් ගන්න අවශ්‍ය නැහැ අපි. අපේ රටේ අපිට පේනවනම් අපේ දැස් වලට පේනවනම් අපේ රටේ තියෙන ප්‍රශ්න මොකද්ද? අපේ වියදම් කරනවා වැඩි ආදායම් වලට වැඩිය. මේ වෙලාවේ ආදායම් වැඩි කරගන්න බෑ. අපි වියදම් ටිකක් අඩු කරමු. කළමනාකරණය කරගමු. මම මෙතන අදහස් කරන්නේ නැහැ මේවා විකිණීමෙන් ලබා ගන්න ආදායමෙන් අර ණය පියවන්න පුළුවන් කියලා. දැන් මේගොල්ලන්ගේ උත්සාහයක් තිබුණේ මේ කොළඹ මේ කොටුවේ තියෙන ඉඩම් ටික විකුණලා බිල්ඩින් ටික විකුණලා ණය පියවන්න පුළුවන් කියලා. ඒ වඩාත් ගැනුම්කාරයෝ නැහැ මට පේන හැටියට. හරි? මේ තියෙන ආර්ථික තත්ත්වය යටතේ. එහෙම නෙමෙයි අපි කතා කරන්නේ. අපි කතා කරන්නේ අනාගතයේ වෙන පාඩු වලින් අපේ රජයේ ආදායම් බදු ගෙවන්නන්ගේ අවශ්‍යතා ඒවා ආරක්ෂා කර ගැනීමට. දවසට රුපියල් මිලියන 100කට කිට්ටු ප්‍රමාණයක් පාඩු වෙන ආයතනය තියා ගැනීමෙන් කාටද වෙන වාසිය? කාටද එකෙන් තියෙන වාසිය? කවුද යන්නේ ඔය එයාලයින් එකේ? මම වගේ අය යන්නේ. ඉතින් ඕගලන්ට ඕනද මට සානාදාර දෙන්න? හරි? ඉතින් ඔන්න ඕකයි අපි අහන ප්‍රශ්නේ. ඒ තියෙන්නේ නිකන් ඍජු සම්බන්ධතාවයක් නෙමෙයි. ඒ කියන්නේ ණය තියෙනවා මේ තියෙන කොම්පැනි ටික විකුණලා ණය පියවමු. ඒම සරල තර්කයක් නෙමෙයි එතන අපි ඉදිරිපත් කරන්නේ. පැහැදිලි නේ? හරි.
No, I think I'll fine.
Yeah.
Thank you.
May I say only one? You go to the IMF just to increase your credibility, and not for the money. It's not the money part. But if you have a program with the IMF, our lenders know that there is some order in which how we will approach it. And I see it in many countries. I worked for the World Bank for a long time. We used to work together. And so the great contribution that they have is to give you some discipline, which you would not have. And at the moment, I don't think we are credible to the rest of the world unless some agent coming and say, we have looked at their books, this is the situation, we can help you. It's not the Christmas time person that is coming, we'll have to look at very hard way, have to go and justify in Washington, what is this program, is it different from others, why is it different? So they have to go through a program. So everybody, the lenders know that if you go through that process, that there is some security to some, how should I put it, some system that is at work, which we don't have now. So even assume that we are able to do it within ourselves, it won't be credible now.
මම මේකට කෙටි එකතුවක් කරොත්
Yeah.
දැන් ඔය හැමෝගෙම මේ මුදල් යට කරලා මොකද්ද මහා පුදුමාකාර මුදල් නාස්තියක් උතන තියෙනවා. ඔය කෙහෙමල් විකුණලා දාන්න පුළුවන්. හරි මේ හොඳ මිලක් හම් වෙන එක නෑ නේද ඔයකෙන් විකුණත හැකි. මම කියන්නේ එහෙම දෙයක් නෙමෙයි. දැන් ඒක වික්කයි කියලා ඔය ප්‍රවෘත්ති වලට යන්නේ නැහැ. මම කියන්නේ හොන්දට සංජානනය වෙන perception එකට වදින headline යන එක ලොකු බඩුවක් විකුණන්න කියලා. ඒකට තියෙන හොඳම කැන්ඩිඩේට් මම හොයාගෙන තියෙන්නේ. ඒ තමයි ශ්‍රී ලංකන් එයාර්ලයින් එක. දාලා දාන්න ඒක. අන්න අරුන් වික්කා කියලා දෙනවා කතන්දරේ. ඔය පොඩි පොඩි සොච්චම් වැඩ කරලා හරියන්නේ නැහැ. දෙන එක දෙන්න ඕනේ ඇහැට කන්ට පේන දෙයක්. හොඳට පින්තූර වලට එහෙම එනේ ඔය හෝටල් බිල්ඩින් ඕව මොනවද? අර එයාර්ලයින් එකේ ලෝගෝ එකයි අරම එක්ක මෙහෙම කරලා පින්තූර දැම්මම ඔන්න යනවා ජාත්‍යන්තර ප්‍රවෘත්ති සේවාවල්. ඒක අපිට අර විශ්වසනීයත්වයේ ගොඩනගා ගන්න හැකි පිටිවහලක් වෙනවා.
Thank you, sir. Ladies and gentlemen, we still have a few more minutes for questions. Are there any more questions? If there's is there anyone else? Or if not, okay. So could you please keep your question concise?
This really is a question plus an observation. Ranjan Wijeratne, when he became chairman of the Sri Lanka State Plantations Corporation, what he told the State Plantations Corporation at that time was, I have no blue-eyed boys. I want everybody to work. And if you do not work, you will suddenly find that your eyes have turned black, and that will be the day you have to go. And from that point onwards, the Sri Lanka State Plantations Corporation ran at tremendous profit. Now, the question is this. If Ranjan Wijeratne could have done it at that time, why couldn't or why shouldn't anybody else apply the same principle to run these places at a profit?
When was Mr. Wijeratne assassinated? 1993 or
Yeah.
somewhere there, right? So, in a way, the answer is staring us in the face, which is 25 years or 30 years have gone by, and nobody has repeated that performance. And in fact, after his death, State Plantations Corporation would have gone back to its bad old ways. So, I think the answer is there for anybody who wants to see the answer.
අපිට සිංහල භාෂාවෙන් ප්‍රශ්න තියෙනවා නම් ඒවත් ඉදිරිපත් කරන්න අවස්ථාවක් තිබෙනවා. තව ප්‍රශ්න තියෙනවද?
Yeah, now I think Ms. Monasinghe said that end of the day these state-owned enterprises know that they will be supported by State Bank, right? You said. Now, how do you get out of that? Because if you say CEB will owe some amount to Ceylon Petroleum Corporation, Ceylon Petroleum Corporation would be have to get some from Sri Lankan Airlines. This is how it all works, right? And end of the day, the State Bank also will come to rescue, right? So how do you get out of this? It can't be happen overnight also. What is your strategy to get out?
So it can't happen overnight, but you can see that I think with CPC, they actually did make a profit a few years ago, and they actually paid down some of their debt, right? So this is as Professor Samarjeeva said, you have to look at each one of these sectors and then find the right structure and the solution for each sector. So it's not, but equally the banks today, previously, any loan that went to the government of Sri Lanka, they did not have to put any capital against that. in banks, you have to put a certain amount of your equity against the loans that you're making, right? For the state loans, if it was backed by the government, they didn't need to do that. Today, they have to do that. So even to state-owned enterprises, the banks have to analyze that risk. What is the risk they are taking when they lend? And that affects their performance. So the banks are being moved to that because of international guidelines. Whether state banks like it or not, they are being moved to that because they are holding to international guidelines, right? That is the regulatory requirements from the rest of the world in terms of banking, right? Saying that, comfort letters come through, there is this support. And make no mistake, the two banks also benefit from it to a certain degree because they lend dollars to these state-owned enterprises at relatively high rates. They are competitive. They are not lending it at a sub-standard or a sub-market rate. But as to when they will get paid for that and carry that debt, that's part of the problem. But it's, I think my colleagues can answer this better, but it will take the restructuring of all of these entities and not just one. It's not just one solution.
Thank you, Ms. Munasinghe. Do we have any other questions? We can entertain one more question. If there is one last question, we can go ahead now. Hold on, you're getting a microphone.
During the presentation at the start, you all stated that one of the solutions to the current SOE problem is de-investing. Now, the central bank said that they plan on deriving funds from underutilized SOEs as a source of income to the country. Do you think this is the solution that you all spoke about? What's your comment? The CBSL said that they plan on deriving funds from underutilized SOEs as a source of income for the country. Do you think this is the sort of solution that you spoke about? Or?
I think I answered that once. I'm not saying that just sell the land. I mean, you take, for example, railways is sitting on a bunch of underutilized land, right? You take the Hyatt or whatever company that owns it, Canoville or something. I think you talked about that, right? Hilton is owned by the state, part of the Hilton, right? I mean, why are we owning Hilton, for God's sake, right? I'm not saying, I don't think we are advocating. I mean, I'm not saying that's a harmful thing, right? It's not a harmful thing to sell those shares and get out of these very peripheral things that have very little connection to the core activities of government. But that's not the focus. We're saying things that are important to the economy, to the consumers, to all of us, are being mismanaged. And they are causing us losses. So, for example, Sri Lankan Airlines, when it loses, give me the number, 43 billion? Yes. 43 billion Sri Lanka rupees in 1 year. 43, 9 zeros. Right? 9 zeros. Who is paying for that? It's some guy in Siemalandua who's paying for it out of some special commodity levy that has been applied to his potatoes and his sugar and various things like that. That's the guy who's paying for it. He doesn't come anywhere near an airport, right? So we are asking why. Why shouldn't we protect our people, the general taxpayer, from this enormous burden? India has done it. If India, such a prominent country like India, can do without the pride of a national airline that is losing $3 million a day, why do we need to hang on to this albatross? Is the question I'm asking. Right? In the same way, I'm saying that we can take entities such as the water board, the electricity board, Litrogas, for example. Are you happy about how Litrogas treated you? In the last few days, are you just overjoyed by the level of customer care and comfort and safety regulation that you were given by this very caring government-owned entity that you actually own? I mean, if you look at it theoretically, you own the damn thing. You own Litro, and how was Litro treating you? Isn't it better to have a properly regulated gas market where there are efficiency considerations and safety incentives built into the regulatory scheme? Isn't that better? So we are saying restructure, not just to collect money. We are saying restructure in order to make it a more efficient country that provides better services to us, to the customer. That's not happening in the current arrangement.
Thank you, sir. Ladies and gentlemen, we've now it's 4 o'clock. We've been going on for about 1.5 hours. So unfortunately, we've come to the end of our session. Therefore, we will be stopping the question and answers. And now I invite the panelists if they would like to give any closing remarks.
I have spoken to you.
Dr. Rajapatirana, do you have any final comments?
Actually, I don't have.
Thank you, sir. Yes. So, ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the Advocata Institute, I'm grateful for all of you for taking part and joining today's session. Special thanks to Professor Rohan Samarajiva, our academic chair, Dr. Sarath Rajapatirana, Madam Anarkali Munasinghe, Advocata's advisor, for joining us. Just a few thoughts from today's discussion. I think what all these panelists highlighted was the urgency of reforms on why we need to immediately reform state-owned enterprises and how that can probably be our salvation. So I think I'll end with a quote that I thought was quite relevant. Edmund Burke said, "A nation without the means of reform is without the means of survival." I think we as a people should probably really think about this. And as Dr. Rajapatirana said, reform now or perish is probably where we should, where we have reached at the moment. Satya?
බොහොමත්ම ස්තුතියි අද අද්භූත ආයතනය විසින් සංවිධානය කරලා තිබ්බ මේ සැසිරයට සහභාගී වුණාට අනාගතයේත් මේ වගේ සාකච්ඡාවලින් ඔබව හමු වීමේ බලාපොරොත්තුවෙන් අදට අපි සමුගන්නවා බොහොමත්ම ස්තුතියි